Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Nerdesthemen. No, actually, this is the first ever English-speaking episode of the Nerdesthemen. To explain a little bit the name Nerdesthemen, which is a somewhat like a derivation of a German word called Tagesthemen, which is the name of a German daily news show provided in German television. And this is basically a show where news items of the day were a little bit more explained in more detail. And when I did the Nerdesschau, which is a derivation of Tagesthemen, which is like a show about small little items of news, I took the idea to Nerdesschau to take like nerd items and explain it a little bit more in detail, what's happening on a day-by-day or in a weekly basis. And at some point I derived this idea of a show called Nerdesthemen, which is take small little news items that have been popping up in a couple of weeks, brewing somewhere, and then do a large deep dive into it. And so far I did one video on, for example, larger companies that are trying to get bigger and bigger, like Disney, for example, when they were trying to buy up Fox, for example, or a deep dive into loot boxes that I did back in the day. But most of those things were in German, and this time this is the very first thing where I do this in English. So I hope, you're going to like it. But let's just say I produced this original video in German first. Then I posted some behind the scenes pictures from it, and several best friends from the Kind of Funny community were anticipating this video. So I thought with some hesitation, like, okay, I think they may be a little bit disappointed when they will find out that it's going to be in German, which they will probably not understand. So I decided to postpone the original video and basically do this thing twice, and produce a second video of this thing, translate it, and bring it then to the English language. So the pitch for this show is like a long deep dive into a certain topic, like a normal episode of Last Week Tonight, but let's just say less funny. Try to do some kind of funny things here and there, but yeah, it's going to be a little bit more nerdy. So I haven't done this kind of videos in a very long time, but I think just in the middle of a global fucking pandemic, this is a good time as ever to do so again. Question is, however, why am I doing this video right now? Well, I've been seeing some strange looking posts on several social media platforms in the last couple of weeks, coming from all kinds of the political spectrum. Some of them coming from what has become widely known as the so-called mainstream media, or from many more, let's just say, alternative corners, like blogs or strange YouTube channels. I have to say I don't like the term mainstream media myself, as this term has some kind of connotations associated with it, similar to the term fake news itself. Just remember that this term used to be describing comedic shows like The Daily Show with Jon Stewart or The Colbert Report. Now, this term itself has been completely changed in its meaning within the last couple of years, but I actually digress, so I come back to the original thing. Many reports and articles try to describe the current situation for the average Joe six-pack. But some of those articles unfortunately fall very flat in doing so, and only a few of them actually succeed. In Germany, there's a quite famous YouTube channel called MyLab that tries to explain scientific topics such that anyone can understand it. One major topic in the last couple of weeks, however, was the presence of scientific journalism or actual scientific context in any form of media. In my opinion, this is one major grudge that I have, even with trustworthy media outlets of any political color at this moment in time. However, since today's world is turning faster and faster, information and news items have to be written faster as well, and have to be read and understood by the reader as fast as possible as well. So let's look at one big scientific news item from the last 10 years outside what you're currently reading day by day during this pandemic. In the summer of 2012, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, or also known with its abbreviation CERN, in Geneva was inviting guest journalists, scientists from all over the world for a particular revelation. After a couple of years, after CERN's activation of the Large Hadron Collider, experiments proved the existence of the so-called Higgs boson with a very high likelihood. So the average Joe six-pack would probably have several what the fuck moments with this news item alone. So what is the European Organization for Nuclear Research? What is a Large Hadron Collider? And what is a Higgs boson? Answering those questions can be quite complex and complicated. However, our current news cycle only allows to answer those things with short bullet points. So you can understand the topic in general, or maybe give you just enough information so you can have a small talk about it. And this is, in my opinion, the key issue here. When you're taking a news item and start to shorten it down, several important key points or critical parts for understanding a news item might be lost during the editing process. Especially if someone talks about a news item which is not within the usual range. Like, imagine Wolf Blitzer from CNN being a basketball sports commentator, while Charles Barkley is commenting on news election polls during this year's US elections. Sure, both of them could sit or stand in front of a camera and present their opinions and their knowledge. However, their expertise is not helping them, especially in those kinds of situations. Sure, I'm not an expert on medicine or physics myself. However, I do believe that I have had some insight within my career with regards to scientific research, scientific writing, and the underlying methodologies. And this includes research. Lots of research. Especially if you're trying to tell new things to a scientific audience, you will need a certain amount of knowledge of current state-of-the-art publications for a specific topic. If you'll do research on a given topic, you'll need to find out first if there had been similar stuff being published. And this is the part of a scientific paper that has the headline previous work. So you'll need to find connections to previous research results and try to find a new hook for your own publication and your research where you can place your new invention, theory, or statistical result that you found. Furthermore, you would also like to acknowledge the work of others as a basis for your own research, because in the future you would also like to get cited by other scientists as well. You're looking at the work of other scientists from all over the world, and you have to ask yourself, what have they written in a publication? What cases did they consider or not consider, or where did their methods have difficulties? Those are the points in their research where you can place your hook for your own paper. You could extend their research with additional elements, make an overall comparison paper for a variety of methods that have been presented in recent years, or develop a theoretical explanation for a practical paper that had previously been published and had been missing in those previous publications before. So then you're doing your research, do some experiments, find differences to the findings of others, and then present your conclusions. Then you also populate your paper with citations to the works of other scientists within the field of expertise, and then when you want to publish your work, you'll give your paper to those very scientists to look at your paper and review it. This process is called peer review and is the basis for all scientific publications, within the scientific community, under the assumption that this publication is not a scam thing. Trust me, there are scam conferences and scam journals, and so you'll also need to be careful where you want to publish your material in the first place. But let's assume you are dealing with a normal scientific journal or conference. Scientists worldwide have a look at your script, try to find holes in your arguments, ambiguities in your experiments, or things that you might have missed during your experiments. Once they have reviewed your paper, some of them even better your script or give you additional hints and tricks and actually make your paper much better than it was in the first place. And once they've reviewed this paper and it crosses a certain quality line, you are able to publish your script on a scientific conference or in a scientific journal. This might take several months from beginning inception of your ideas until the final publication and presentation actually. However, there is a small problem here because the results of your own personal research are shared within a relatively small community. So my former professor at the university had a unique talent to explain complex things relatively simple even to the average Joe six-pack. One example was his explanation for compression algorithms for images based on partial differential equations. So I guess I might have lost some of you while saying this very last sentence. I think that most of you know compression programs like zip or compress image standards like JPEG. Those compression routines are based on algorithms that reduce the size such that data transfer can be done faster and more files can be stored on servers. There are lots of compression algorithms for images and videos. There are many industrial standards for those kinds of things. However, our algorithms could be explained with an interesting analogy. So imagine a room with several heaters being spread across the room. If you place them across at certain positions and with predefined temperatures, you can pretty much control the heat of any kinds of positions throughout the entire room. So now we place those heaters with pixels and the temperature with gray values, or color values to be a little bit more complex. Then you might get the idea what this algorithm can do. You'll define points within an image that have a certain gray value or color value, and then a diffusion-like process fills in the image structure within those given values. The result is a pretty well approximation of the image that you wanted to compress in the first place. So those kinds of ideas were published within the last 10-15 years. But this is just one of a few positive examples. Some people speak about the so-called Ivory Tower that some scientists live in. And this is a very large problem. Science might be difficult to understand for undergraduates, but it is even more difficult to describe the problems you'd like to solve as a scientist for an average Joe six-pack. If you like to understand these kinds of things, you will need to start within the basics first. So one of the biggest parts of scientific research is the proper use of citations and the proper description of scientific source materials. As I mentioned earlier, before you start writing up your research, you'll have to find out first if there hadn't been some other person doing the same thing decades or even centuries ago. Sometimes it takes some time until you find another paper that'll make you say fuck in agony, because the new formula that you developed has been published in a Japanese paper 20 years earlier, but hasn't been published in a Western scientific paper due to lack of translations or this barrier between languages, but like loss in translation, for example. But that does not need to be an entire setback for your publication, because you could start in picking up failed experiments and missing theories from this original paper and start your new paper from those kinds of bullet points. Sometimes it happens that you have to sit in a room and read through dozens and dozens of papers to find the best hook for your new paper. Thanks to the peer-to-peer review process, most scientific publications have a certain trustability in their results and their conclusions. When I was doing research myself, I was doing research within the area of, I think you might have guessed, image processing. This community was somewhat compact, and when you are doing reviews yourself, you might deduce where a blindly submitted paper is coming from, so even if a paper is stripped of any reference to the original authors. However, most of those papers were written such that algorithms are relatively easy to re-implement by yourself and test the results and compare this to the results of the submitted paper. Reproducibility is essential for a scientific publication or study, because most of the time the biggest issue is if others could reproduce your results and understand your findings. If you're doing an empirical study of a large test group, reproducibility is becoming more and more difficult. One study was using 100 programs, the next study used 500 students that volunteered for the study, while the next one only had 20 male participants over the age of 50 for some reason. Based on those data points, the conclusions might be differing vastly. However, if, for example, a publication has found conclusions about diseases like cancer, scientific topics may spread into mainstream news coverage as well. For example, let a study try to find a correlation of getting cancer while having a heavy consumption of any arbitrary substance over a longer period of time. Then it might happen that parts of that research will be described within other publications for a larger audience. However, the journalist of this publication might not have the same background in science as the authors of the original article itself, or the scientific audience. Hence, any attempt in describing those research items might result in questionable articles. Those articles might lose any additional references to other research, its entire context, and their larger complex discussions as well. However, sometimes you also have to ask the question about the independence of research articles, especially if they have been sponsored by third parties or organizations, and how reliable are the journals or conferences that are being used, or are those just scam artists trying to collect registration fees? I digress again. Let us talk about one of the bigger problems that I'm currently seeing within social media platforms. And I'm talking about the dangerous reduction of scientific argumentations, missing citations, necessary research, and missing mathematical understanding. So the first issue that I want to talk about is the truncation of scientific arguments. I want to show this issue with a rather personal example. So if I tell you that I bought a car 4 years ago in order to get a package out of a package station, I think many of you would think that I'm crazy and insane. But I actually did this. The problem is that this just describes the start and end point of a much larger story, or longer. So this might take a couple of minutes, but stick with me. There was a package waiting for me within the larger Stuttgart area, where while I was in my home area named Saarland, which is like 250 kilometers away. It was at the beginning of fall season, and I was longing for my 2-week vacation that I've been longing for quite some time. So my car was about to disintegrate, and my federal inspection was about to run out, and the engine was too loud. So I decided to use those 2 weeks to look for a new car. At that time, I have ordered the limited special edition of Rise of the Tomb Raider with a rather awesome Lara Croft figure. It should have been delivered several days before, however, it still hadn't been shipped by Amazon yet. So I've been waiting until Monday afternoon, until the last possible moment. Me and my friends have this usual thing where we meet in a local pub for a pub quiz at 8 p.m. And I was quite late for this already. So around 4 p.m. I wanted to change the order to deliver it to my Saarland home. But for some reason I was no longer able to change that anymore. Something was happening with that order. And 2 minutes later I actually got an additional mail that told me that the package was indeed shipped and should arrive tomorrow. Awesome! As I wasn't able to change anything anymore. And I was gone. 1 day later, the package was indeed put into the package station. However, by the time I was 250 kilometers away already. by terms and regulations of the package station, my limited edition of Rise of the Tomb Raider would be stored in the station for the next 9 workdays. And then it will be sent, or calendar days actually, and then it will be sent back to Amazon. So since this limited edition was already sold out at Amazon, I had to get this package out of this package station before it was sent back. At first glance, you would think about the possibilities of sending this package from one station to another. Well, this would have been an awesome idea, but this is not possible if a package has already been delivered. Well, to the package station. And this was the actual official answer by the customer service at the time. The other proposal by my friends was if I was able to ask anyone in Esslingen to get the package out of the station. Awesome idea, but this person would have needed to use my ID card for this package station, or some kind of package station ID thingy, something like that. And I had this card already with me in Saarland. Therefore, the only possible solution for me would be to drive back to Esslingen and get this thing out myself and then drive back again. Well, that day I went to look for a new car with my father and a friend. I wasn't lucky at the first vendor, but there was this nice little car at the second stop. We scheduled a test drive for the next day, and by Thursday I was confident to buy this car the next week. Then a new question came up: where should I register this car? At home in Saarland or at the place where I'm currently living, namely Esslingen, a city near Stuttgart? After some considerations, I decided to register it in Esslingen. The car vendor had the service of registering the car by themselves within Saarland, but not outside of it, or I would have to do it myself. And I would have needed to return to Esslingen to register it within the next few days before I could start driving with it. And this was my necessary reason that I needed to get back to Esslingen within the next days and rescue my package from the incoming deadline. In the next few days I got several reminder mails that there was some package waiting for me. I got more and more nervous day by day until the weekend arrived. I traveled back to Esslingen by train, drove with the S-Bahn to the package station, and finally I had this pretty precious limited edition rescued after 6 of 9 possible days. Look how awesome it is. Everything is worth it. The next day I registered my car, was driving back to home for the rest of my vacation, and was back at home by lunch. 2 days later I got my new car, great car by the way, but if anyone would ask, I would always tell them, or just tell them, that I bought this car just to get this package and this Lara Croft figure out of this package station in Esslingen. Sure, this sounds insane, but I think after this very long explanation, anyone would understand this shortened story. Unfortunately, it shows only a major issue in today's society. No one likes to listen to a 5-minute long boring story about the stupidity of the German parcel system. No one takes the time to listen to other person's stories. Everything has to be reduced to the small little bullet points. Sometimes you have to also to consider people only listening to your arguments in passing, misunderstand or even mishear a sentence, and you would have to correct the wrong story that is starting to stay in the minds of your listeners. Only recently I had an issue where I was in a Skype meeting and some of my colleagues misheard a sentence and misunderstood that the person we were talking to was using the past tense when he was talking about previous issues that they had some time ago. While I had to convince my colleagues that those problems happened in the past and did not happen just now. And it took me like 5 minutes until everything was cleared out. It was a little bit frustrating. Then I had a job interview 5 years ago where they demanded me to tell them parts of my background as bullet points or short headlines. Well, let's just say this is somewhat difficult to me. I like explaining things in epic proportions. Well, that's a small little problem that I have just with my small little parcel story that I just told you. Granted, this job interview didn't end well for me that day, but I think that the reduction of scientific content in general is barely possible and might end up in being very difficult and dangerous especially if things rely on strong background knowledge. In the worst case, this could even be deadly. One example in recent years is what we've been hearing from the White House in the US. People within the intelligence agencies try to compile their daily status reports in short, bite-sized chunks, such that the commander-in-chief does not get bored once he started reading the second sentence. And this is one of the biggest issues in today's society. We don't listen to other people anymore. We are just reading the 280-character message on Twitter, or the breaking news from the news agency of your choice appearing as a short message on your smartwatch. But those headlines do not convey the why questions that a news item raises. More and more I read from people on social media platforms like Twitter or Facebook concerns and criticisms about recent face masks regulations. For example, some doctors believe that mask wearing would be a medical foolishness. Sure, if I would be the only one wearing a mask within a room with 100 other people, I think chances are relatively high for me to get infected, even if I am indeed wearing a mask. On the other hand, my chances reduce drastically if all of the people wear a mask in this scenario. Because if you would like to be 100% sure that you wouldn't get infected, you would have to wear a hazmat suit, I think, whenever you would like to leave your apartment. I think this is relatively unpractical, right? And I believe this is one major disassociation between politics and communication within any form of media. The only measure that would give you 100% safety would be if nobody had direct contact with others anymore. But this total lockdown is not practicable as well. One way to do this is to get the message clear the first time, which means telling that face masks are valid tools to reduce the probability to infect oneself and reduce the risk of a possible infection of others. Another problem is the missing mathematical understanding of well-understood concepts that play a certain role during a pandemic. We'll have two examples here: the exponential function and conditional probabilities. So when I went to school 20 years ago, those topics were only in the curriculum during the last 2 years of school, or the German gymnasium system actually. There are some German-based teachers watching this video. Feel free to correct me in the comments, but let us get back to our examples. The topic of conditional probabilities has to be tackled quite carefully. The main question is if an event would have occurred if another event has taken place before it or is still taking place. A classic example is the use of an HIV test to determine if someone has been infected with this disease or not. At this point during school, I started to draw tree-like mind maps to visualize it on paper. In general, you are interested in two facts. Does a test provide a valid result? And how long do I have to wait until I get a response? At first, you will consider the result of the test if it's either positive or negative. From then on, you can draw additional branches. On the positive branch, you will consider the positive result if the person is indeed infected or is not infected. Then this is also called a false positive. On the negative side, you are also considering if the negative result is correct for a person that has indeed not been infected, or if this was a so-called false negative. At this point, the filter bubble throughout the internet gets quite aggravated. You cannot trust the test. The test cannot be used to determine if someone has been infected or not, and similar stuff like that. With HIV, there is probably still more time to make additional tests and verify those results that you're getting from those tests. With SARS-CoV-2, any minute counts because you might be infectious yourself. Also, the testing capabilities are somewhat limited, so that testing someone multiple times within a short period of time is becoming not feasible anymore. Technically speaking, you can consider this test to be a valid test if you are actually infected. However, it's more like it's better to understand this test to be a more confirmation that you are not infected. So this has been an issue for HIV tests for the last more than 30 years, But this also holds true for this SARS-CoV-2 test as well. Mathematically speaking, you are interested in the probability that you are really infected under the assumption that the test was positive and not the other way around. And that's why you need to be careful when you're talking about conditional probabilities. Another mathematical model that is currently quite underrated is the exponential function and exponential growth. There's an old legend from around 1500 years ago that says that tells the story of a person named Sisa ibn Dahir that had an audience with an Indian king and wanted to get a couple of wheat corns. So he took out a chessboard and placed one corn at the first field, two at the second, four at the third, 8 at the fourth, and so on. So he's always doubling the amount of corns that he's lying on one field and puts them on the next field. He did this for a few fields and demanded from the king to get the amount of wheat corns if you would fill up the entire chessboard according to this method. So the king then was quite amused and gave him a sack filled with wheat corn. Sisa, however, demanded a recount. The thing is that if you would sum up all values of 2 up to the power of until 63, you'll end up with 18 quintillion wheat corns, or more than 18 quintillion. So that's an 18 with 18 zeros behind it. As a comparison, this would be the current world pop production of wheat corns times 2000. Let's just say it's quite unlikely that this king had that amount of wheat corns, but this example shows the rapid growth of an exponential function. This is the fatal thing now, as the growth of a pandemic follows the exponential growth if it's not stopped early. If one infected person would infect exactly 2 others, this will be around 32,000 people after just 40 days. And this is without additional modeling of time of a person to be infectious, the transmissivity of the infection, and lots of other factors. The more people someone is able to infect, and if this value is larger than 1, the more rapid the infection spreads. Here in Europe and also here in Germany, we were in a situation to put this average infection rate to a value around 1 in the last couple of months, which is now somewhat a little larger than 1, unfortunately. However, one thing you might argue is the fact that some policies look more like as if they've been selected after a throw with a 20-sided dice, or people with prejudices have had some influence. Sure, you might understand the idea to ban people coming into a region if they are coming in from a high-risk area. Some politicians fear to lose the numbers game in here, and thus you would have seen lots of those travel ban regulations in the past that have been introduced within the last couple of months for a short period of time. Surely the problem should stay somewhere else. But it's like some politicians have seen similar problems appear within the last 5 years before and try to cope with this kind of situation with the same not functioning measures. But I digress. Let's consider the third item on my list, which I'm currently seeing within all over the entire media landscape, and especially within social media platforms. You are no longer able to distinguish between facts and opinions. Let's stay with mathematics. According to established mathematical rules, the result of an addition of 2 and 2 is 4. So if I would be a young pupil in school and would answer 5, I might be rewarded with an F, but my answer is absolutely false. So if I would persist on my answer that 2 plus 2 equals 5, this is no longer a fact, it's an opinion. And it would give you a telltale sign for my teacher that I haven't understood math at all. During school, I not only had math as a major class, I also had history as a major class. So depending where you are in Germany and what kind of school you're visiting, you might get a choice by the end of your school career to choose between several classes you can major in. So I myself had a choice between 3 different possibilities, and I decided for some kind of reason to major in math, English and history. History was an entirely different kinda beast in math, to be honest. I always loved history, and I was kind of fascinated with some of the major topics like the story of the USA and the story of Germany as a country within the 20th century. Lots of things happened there. Truth to be told, I was a fact learner. There were lots of occasions where I was reading secondary, not really school books, but more like this history book, this book about World War II, and this about the Weimar Republic, and for some reason I dived into Alamo and did all those things that did not have any influence in my grades after all. So I was reading book after book about historical days and what has happened there. I like to go to a class test prepared, to be honest. Unfortunately, my history teacher was a big fan of source material and their analysis. So if you look at the curriculum back the day, there was something like 50-50 source material research and 50% dates. And my teacher at that time was basically 100%ing the source material analysis. Yeah, I wasn't really fond of that, but let's just say at that time I was quite pissed, but now 20 years later, I think I have found new respect for this kind of classroom tests. So if you're reading through historic source material, you have to ask yourself, when was this text written? Who wrote it? For what reason? What did the author want to achieve? What kind of background knowledge did the author have at the time of writing? And so on. Well, for example, if you would have some kind of source material coming from Nazi Germany, well, then you would ask yourself, where is this thing coming from? Is this thing from an oppressed part of Germany, some kind of resistance? Is this coming from within the Nazi party itself? Is it coming from some kind of war communication between generals and stuff like that? You always have to consider who is part, where does this guy or this person fit within the overall topic, where within the overall tapestry of history. What did he want to achieve? Where did he fit in at that time and space? Especially during those times when persons in higher power declare news items or even factoids as fake news, if they don't like them, you should question any news item about who wants to say what and why with a given item. This might begin with small things like a tweet, a Twitter, or a Facebook page, and this also has to be considered to any speech by a politician, scientist, or any other kind of influencer. Is someone trying to explain a certain given circumstance, or is the text more or less a large critique of actions that have been done in the past? Or both, actually. I mean, if I'm taking a step back right now, this very video that you're looking right now is, by definition, actually kind of both as well. However, I have seen many publications throughout the last couple of weeks that news items explaining facts are considered to be opinions, while commentaries and opinion pieces are treated as factoids, even if they don't share additional resource material like references, as you should find in a scientific publication to verify those statements. Or something even worse happens. Quotes are being used after they've been stripped down and used out of context. I've seen this kind of bad scientific journalism on all kinds of publications from left to right. I mean, most journalists did not major in STEM. I mean, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So I have to admit, this is a very harsh statement, but unfortunately it's true. Scientific journalism has become a dying species in media. Scientific influencers like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye in the English-speaking community, try to bring people towards embracing scientific thinking and methodologies, and are very interesting persons in mainstream that try to put people to take scientific topics seriously and push people to actually study them and do research themselves or even graduate or whatever. However, most media publications have faded out their coverage on scientific topics drastically. Then you'll end up with a situation that when the understanding of a given topic demands the use of mathematical concepts like an exponential function or conditional probabilities, you'll need to educate the reader or viewer first what those concepts are actually, and what they mean until you can apply this to your news item that you want to explain. I always like to put a small little explanation box in any news item that explains some stuff if I was an editor there. But most of the time, this is then used for opinion pieces. Those opinion pieces then talk about 2 plus 2 being 6 or 3 or 2 actually, and so on. But if you're trying to do your research on your own, you'll have to be very careful too. Especially in times where conspiracy theories about flat earths, anti-vaxxers, or QAnon are spreading throughout society. You should always be careful if you're looking for source material, and I always like to treat those things as I did during those history tests back in school. As I mentioned earlier, scientific publications follow a given review and release process. In this process, lots of your peers have to look at your paper. They look at your methodology, your citations, your experiments, your data, and your conclusions, and review every single word that you wrote before your paper gets published in a publication or on a conference. Today, some publications are being literally fast-pathed to a large non-scientific audience. Several websites have provided services as a so-called preprint server, where scientists can publish their work even before the reviewing process has concluded. This can be quite fatal for some kinds of publications. Imagine a paper that has been published on one of these preprint servers and this contains wrong results or misleading conclusions. Now imagine a journalist from any form of media finding this paper without having the necessary scientific background to understand it and writes an article about it. I think you might see where I'm getting at. Writing a news item based on faulty science might put a negative light on the reputation of a news organization. It also puts shade on scientific research and measures derived from those scientific research. People lose their trust in news organizations, research, and science. It's like a game of Chinese whispers or telephone, and a sign of today's times where articles have to be pumped out by the numbers as fast as possible, sometimes even without an internal reviewing process. If we are talking about news organization, there might be also some kind of reviewing process that involves a chief editor, additional colleagues and experts, but not everyone has majored in the very topic that is subject of the article. So far, I've only talked about journalistic-based entities like CNN, New York Times, and other news organizations, magazines, or journals that have some kind of journalistic standards. But if we are also including blogs, social media accounts, influencers of any kind, this looks totally different here. Topics are being shortened until nothing makes sense anymore. Articles with pages of data, conclusions and whatnot are based on one misunderstood calculation at the very beginning, and the entire argument would fall together like a cardboard house. There's whataboutism, some compare apples with oranges, some even would leave away clear facts if this would help underline the argument. Some would even suggest that the reader should perform their own research, without giving any point of reference or source material that could give you some form of credibility or starting point. And this is the major issue that I have with today's conspiracy theories that would welcome anyone to their course with open arms, just like QAnon right now. At one point during the last 4 years where QAnon came up as a large conspiracy group, members of this ideology were responsible to get James Gunn fired as a director from Guardians of the Galaxy 3 by Disney. Yes, this did happen. But this is still a different topic for another video. I think, as a conclusion to this quite large video, I wanted to tell you to consider news items that you see and also news organizations and question where those things are coming from and what their overall agenda is. Is there a forum for political or social commentaries? Are these official news items, scientific publications? And always ask yourself, what does the author gain from this publication? Or is this text, does this contain only facts like an encyclopedia? I hope you've enjoyed this video and start to think about what you're reading, but I would like if you would write a comment into the comment section down below, talk about your own thoughts. However, I urge you to stay civil. Some of my former videos on conspiracy theories have, let's just say, somewhat dirty comment sections. Let's leave it like that. But I would still like to hear your personal opinions. That being said, I hope we will see each other in another video. Stay safe, stay healthy, and Kai says bye.